like growing out my clothes, with stars in my pocket, dreaming about making my hood glow. This sound like every place I would go if I could fly. This feel like every summertime.
And welcome to the Next Gen podcast. Today we are diving deeper into our conversation about bell hooks, Ain't I a Woman, and its surprising relevance to some very current trends. I'm Nayla Peters.
I'm Tim Gerderson.
And we're thrilled to have just this amazing discussion about everything. So let's start with the girl boss culture. The way I see it, girl boss is essentially just a woman who is successful and has made like a lot of strides in her career and has really just paved the way for herself. So, Tim, from a male perspective, what's your initial take on this phenomenon?
Well, I came into this just thinking like I was going to get your thoughts because, like I didn't know what the girl boss thing was or anything like that. So I was just thinking like from what you just said, it sounds kind of like the more like strong, independent woman like thing like that. Like, like how like, but like expand upon that, like what like strong, independent or like girl boss or whatever like means to like a woman.
So really, it's just like I kind of like said earlier, it's just a woman who's made a lot of strides in her career and is essentially like self-made, quote unquote, I guess. Personally, I think it's too capitalistic, I guess. So, because I kind of think society is really trying to glamorize the girl boss culture for the sake of, monetary gain and profit. But do you think it's like a genuine goal, to help liberate women in the workplace?
Well, I wouldn't pin it down to like capitalistic or anything like that because I think you've really seen this like trend shift around like cultures across the world. Like we've even seen like in places like, Iran, like females are getting, more educated. They're getting higher positions, right? Like it's a growing trend that we can see like today, like girls becoming, females, whatever you want to call it, like becoming more and more higher throughout the social status. And I think I don't think it's anything wrong with that, obviously. But like, it's a thing that I think does sometimes get taken, a little bit, out of depth. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, right. And I think that's interesting because just personally, the way I see it, it's kind of like the system has just found like a new demographic to, constantly get output from. I think it's just been, while, yeah, it can have a lot of positives to it, I think it has been shifted in a way to make it marketable. But that's just my opinion, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess you could say, like, with regards to our culture today, like, that has become, in that aspect, very, yes, capitalistic, right? Because you have, like, females marketing themselves, you have them, going about themselves, and it feels not even just capitalistic, but very libertarian in a way, like, like, it's just really unrestricted warfare on, like, females really going and, promoting themselves and then becoming more independent, like, more, like, far away from the male identity.
Yeah, but I think that's also tacking onto that. That's also just kind of like people being a product of their environment, and here in the United States is very just, profit centered. So people are really just having to find a way for themselves to make themselves more marketable. But I see that. I really understand.
Yeah, I can agree with that. All right.
So let's pivot to the clean girl aesthetic. So I've seen a lot of controversy around this one, and honestly, it's mainly because people have pointed out its racial biases, which I honestly tend to agree with. So for those who don't know, the clean girl aesthetic is essentially a trend that is meant to appear to be high class, but also minimal and effortless. So it's mainly in regards to fashion, where people wear minimal makeup, really plain clothing, slicked back hair, things of that nature. So what are your thoughts on this trend? Do you see any potential downsides with it?
I would say my first thought is like, do you think that this is coming from more so of a like a male, like, what would you say, like a male perspective, gaze. Male gaze perspective, like, and like I'm not talking just from a male gaze perspective, but like from what men want, like, a lot of men say like we want to see like natural women and stuff like that. Do you think it's from that, or like it's just from women wanting to be, a clean girl or whatever?
I never thought of it that way. Honestly, it might. The way I've seen it through like TikTok and stuff like that, I mainly chopped it up to being like a class difference, because a lot of these, so-called minimal brands that they're wearing are very expensive. But I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, like I would chalk maybe that part up to like the females, like, doing what they want, buying expensive things. So probably like this is a, actionable decision that we're making. But like from that, like what you said about minimal makeup, like less artistic, less, I'm going to like impose things on my body and like, be natural. I think
Right.
that that's from a male gaze perspective, in my opinion. But I don't know if that's like the full story. But I think that it's part of that. Yeah.
Because the main difference that I've seen is people like feeling alienated by the clean girl aesthetic. For example, a lot of like Black and Latina women, they're known for like really like beat down faces and like glamorous makeup, and there are always things like lace fronts and wigs and things of that nature, and the clean girl aesthetic really harps down on that and really rejects that. So I feel like there is a racial undertone to it. But tying it to the books, Bell Hooks talks extensively about the historical devaluation of Black women's beauty and the imposition of white beauty standards. So, I really feel like the clean girl aesthetic kind of echoes these historical biases. And, how do you think it's really biasing what kind of people are valued? Like, do you think that?
I would say with regards to like saying it has a racial undertone, I don't really know about that, right? Like I think, it's kind of hard to put a pin down on that because I think that Black women do a lot of things that are natural, right? Like, and that are, not imposed like lace fronts, BBLs, whatever, like you can think of, like, right? Like I think they do a lot of natural things. So I think it's just a specific subset of Black women that would, you have to say that are like that because I don't think that every Black woman is like, pinned down in that like specific thing, right?
But I do think it definitely caters to a certain type of women.
Yeah, like a certain type of like how Bell Hooks likes to tie everything like patriarchy, like saying stuff like that, right? Like stuff like traditional like women type of thing. But I don't think it should be tied to that. But that's just my personal thought.
Because it really does highlight a lot of Eurocentric features. Like I mentioned earlier with the slick back hair, it's mainly straight hair that's being slicked back like that, and there's a lot of like slimness that really goes into it. Obviously, a lot of Black and Hispanic women aren't as slim as their white counterparts, so I think it's important to highlight stuff like that. But yeah, I guess that's interesting. It really makes you wonder, who gets to be seen as effortlessly put together, and what type of people are being seen as doing too much.
Yeah, I get you.
Now we could tackle the romanticization of trad wife culture. So this topic is one that I've honestly been dying to talk about because it truly, truly does have a particularly complex relationship to feminism. So before we get into it, as a man, what is your take on this appeal?
My take on this appeal, right?
Yeah,
my take is like, I'm a more so do whatever you want type of person, right? Like if you want to be a trad wife, if you want to like live that type of lifestyle, of course, go ahead and do what you want, right? Like I just, as long as it doesn't spew into like the imposition of like your thoughts on others, like thought policing, whatever, like, I'm perfectly fine with it personally.
Right. And to define a trad wife a little bit, it's essentially this trend or this culture of kind of shifting backwards a little bit. So it really glamorizes the social conception of, women kind of being in traditional roles, like being the caretaker, being in the kitchen, being the manager of the home. And, one of the most popular kind of trad wife influencers we've seen these days is Nara Smith. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Yeah, I've heard of her. She's like that like model / TikTok famous person.
Kind of stay-at-home mom, and she films these videos of her being in her kitchen and cooking everything from scratch. So yeah, she's like a prime example of all this. So how do you think Bell Hooks would critique, women being confined to such specific roles?
Yeah, well, Bell Hooks would obviously take a huge issue with that, since obviously like she saw the entire thing of historical slavery as like, this very patriarchal thing, and she like really like classified that with a moral legislation of this is bad, like right, like this is like when Black women are like forced to like work kitchen roles, and men are forced to like be outside. They're never working kitchen roles, and she actually like incidentally saw like black men as like privileged by not having to do that. So obviously she didn't see very highly the idea of like traditional values. Traditional women are more stay at home, and then men are more like do the work type of role. Yeah, because
she went into a lot of detail in the book about how Black women during, their period of enslavement, they were forced to do a lot of traditionally male roles. Like, for example, she mentioned how because a lot of Black women's hands were more, I guess, slim and dexterous compared to their Black male counterparts, they were actually better at picking cotton. However, they weren't as highlighted for their work. So there's this kind of sense of duality where, yes, you have to be the caretaker, but you also have to step up and kind of take this traditionally male role of being the provider. And the trad wife, trend goes against all of that, I really think.
Yeah. So what would be your thoughts on like, well, now as it's today, obviously slavery is done with, but like,
Right.
what would you say like today? Like, what do you think about that role as like we've had, obviously more equality after like, the slavery period and even after like Jim Crow and stuff like that?
Like you said, I do think that, women should be able to have the choice to choose whether they want to be the caretaker or the provider of things of that nature. But personally, I do think it kind of sets us back. Like,
In what ways?
like an example, the feminist movement, we've made so many strides to get women in the workplace. And for so many people to come out and say, well, I don't want to work, that's fair. But, you have to take into account that other people do want to work, and pushing out narratives like that are being used to kind of, devalue and kind of prove that, oh, y'all don't want to work. Okay, that's fine. I don't know. I don't really like it all that much. But that's just me personally.
Do you think that every trad, like traditional, like woman wants to be like a non-working person, like in totality?
I don't think it's really that they don't want to work. I think it's just that the work that they do, they find more satisfaction doing the work within the household and taking care of the kids and, taking care of the husband and things of that nature,
But like,
or the spouse.
I'm talking like unemployed, like okay, we're like females are like saying like I don't want to like rise throughout the social structure. I want to just be fully unemployed and not even like contribute to like the economy in any way, shape, or form, right?
I don't know. I don't think it's really that they just are lazy and don't want to work, because, keeping up the house, it does take a lot of work. And kind of like I think we discussed in class at one point, where a lot of these housewives today do have degrees. So if something, goes wrong or something doesn't really work out the way they thought, they still have a degree to fall back on and where they could enter the workplace if they wanted to.
Yeah, I get you, but I did have like one thought on this. I kind of like it kind of like passed my mind. But do you think that like this also like solves a few problems though that we've seen like with feminism in some ways of like finding finding roles, finding partners? Like, do you think that it solves some issues like that, or do you think it's just like, what do you think, or do you not have like a thought on that?
I mean, I really don't think it solves anything. Finding roles, yeah, I think it could help you find a sense or find a place where you feel valued and kind of find a place where you just feel like you fit. But that's not the case for a lot of people. If that's your choice, that's fine. But I don't think that should be the go-to. We've seen its problems in the past and how many issues it has brought up. So I really don't think we should kind of be dependent on this trad wife aesthetic. As for finding a partner, I also don't think that, it should be used to find, a spouse or anything of that nature. I think if you're finding a partner solely because of your traditional values, I think that's just all going to go to, like, I don't want to cuss on here, but I think that's just all going to be, just terrible. I think, especially looking at a, heteronormative perspective where the woman is in the house and the man is doing A, B, C, X, Y, Z, I think that it just, if you're finding a man solely and he wants you solely because you're in the house, I think that's just proving, that's just a recipe for disaster. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, my perspective of this would be like, okay, since you're a traditional wife, right? My thought was like with finding a partner, right? You're going to have to find a traditional man to do that, right? So like it's going to be like this sort of like, like incidental type of thing, right? Like you're going to be a traditional wife, but you can't like be a traditional wife and like be with a guy who's like, not making anything, not able to provide, doesn't even have a house, right?
Right,
So like,
exactly.
I was thinking that like this would naturally lead you to better partners is what my thought would be like, you know what I'm saying, with the traditional wife thing. But it's not always like that, obviously, but like for the most part, that's what I was thinking.
Like in a perfect world, it would be great, but we've seen how terrible it could be, back in like the 50s and 60s where, domestic abuse and domestic violence were, normalized, I think.
Yeah. But I still don't see that issue being like solved through any like sort of like feminist means though. So I'm saying like, with that aside, like, right, don't you think that it would generally like, as opposed to like feminism where it's more so like we're, diving, we're allowing more liberation, we're allowing more like partners to be found. Like, what do you think about like that? Like, because like traditionally with like feminism, right, like you have to like find partner until you find the right one. But then like, what if you just like went like after specific people, right? Like,
I don't think with feminism it's about finding a partner. I think it's about finding value in yourself as a woman outside of a partner. If anything, I feel like feminism rejects the idea of a traditional partner. For example, a lot of feminist spaces that we're seeing in Asia right now, specifically in like Japan and Korea and things of that nature, women are completely forgoing having partners, having sex, procreating, and they're doing this in an effort to raise awareness to the issue on gender. So I think it's all about rejecting traditional partners. So yeah, I don't really think it's about finding a partner. I think it's about, finding value in yourself. But that also kind of ties back to the girl boss thing we said earlier. So where's the line drawn between finding value in yourself and being a tool in a capitalist society?
Mm-hmm. That's a deep question.
Yeah.
You want me to answer that?
I mean, that's just an open-ended answer. It's kind of rhetorical. Okay. I know it's a bit, big, and it's a bit, there's a lot to get into.
Right.
But we could switch over. So going on to the whole, I don't know if you've seen it on TikTok or on Instagram or anything of that nature, but the whole "I'm just a girl" sentiment. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
So it's essentially kind of this phrase that a lot of women and girls have been using. The way I view it, I think it's kind of an excuse. I don't know how to really get into it, but it's really like, oh, I made a mistake. I'm just a girl. What can you expect from me? I'm just a girl. I don't know if you heard the song by Gwen Stefani, "I'm Just a Girl." No?
I think I've maybe heard of that.
Yeah. Her original song was it's funny because the original song was kind of going against the whole excuse of me just being a girl and, things of that nature. But people today are kind of switching it over to, using it as a bit of a crutch, the way I feel. But yeah, what do you think of that? Do you think it's being used as a crutch, or do you think it's a genuine, or it's just kind of like a funny joke that's been on the internet?
I don't think it's an excuse. I think you have to, contextualize everything. Obviously, every person,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to generalize here, but with the rise, like we just said, of females taking more, social status, responsibility, saying I can do this, I can do that, I'm more independent, right? Like using that as an excuse. I mean, obviously, if you're on that train and you're using that as an excuse, I mean, that's pretty hypocritical, but outside of that, I don't think that it would be just an excuse. Say if you just made a mistake and I'm just I'm just girl,
So Hooks talks about a lot of societal, expectations that could lead to internalizing or, limiting beliefs for oneself. So do you think the whole "I'm just a girl" excuse could be, maybe some sort of manifestation of that internalized sexism?
Once again, that's a really hard question. Yeah, ask that again.
Yeah, so do you think the "I'm just a girl" trend is being used as some sort of manifestation of internalized sexism?
Well, I guess you could say that, but also I think that once again, it's kind of like a rhetorical tool for women, right? So you're saying I'm just a girl as an excuse, right? You're aware, you're cognitive of it's probably not that you're just a girl, but you use this, right? As a sort of gotcha, right? Against you know what I'm saying? What used to be oh, you're a woman. Oh, you're a woman. You can't do this. You can't do that. So you use that. You take that. You deflect back, and you're I'm just a girl, right?
Right. So the way I see it, on a surface level, yeah, I do think it's a funny joke, and I tend to like it sometimes. It's kind of funny. Yeah. But if you do look deeper in some of these quote unquote jokes that people are making, I think it is definitely possible that it's internalized hatred for yourself, either implicitly or explicitly. I think that some people do genuinely believe that certain things aren't, for girls, and, using that phrase might become, a subconscious way sort of to navigate, life expectations for women and this new wave of girl boss culture in a way to combat that. So it really is a complex mix of societal pressure and, individual
Could you give
agency.
an example of what this is catchphrase is being used on,
Oh, there's so many. I think, for example, a girl will make a TikTok of her texting back her ex or something like that, and then people in the comments will maybe be like, "Oh, why did you do that?" She'll be like, "Oh, I'm just a girl," as if how could you know better? And I'm like, it's not really. You're a human being with agency. You know better.
Well, maybe the excuse in that point is not just to like signal that you're like it's a gender bias, but maybe they're just saying like, oh, I'm only human. Like maybe they're just using I'm just a girl, like, as like a placeholder for like, oh, I'm just a human. What?
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, like I don't think you could take everything so literally. Maybe like maybe there's like a figurative aspect of like, oh, well, like, you know, how I'm only human, I can make a mistake, but then you just replace it with I'm just a girl, right? Like, and it's the popular trend at the time. So
I never thought about it like that. Yeah, I guess so. That's interesting. So we still have a lot of time left. So do you think that maybe any of these trends or have you personally witnessed any of these trends in action, maybe in real life or online, in your online presence?
Yeah, I would say the traditional, you know, perspective is the one that I've seen more so, and the girl boss culture, obviously also known as like, you know, the independent woman, like, you know what I'm saying, stigma, or not stigma, but like the trend or whatever. Yeah, I've seen those too, but as for like the clean girl or the I'm just a girl thing, I haven't seen any of that personally. I think that's more so of like a, you know, female oriented sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. I guess it makes sense. So do you think maybe social media amplifies these trends, or they'd still be here without, you know, this big digital space like TikTok, for example? A lot of them came out through TikTok. So do you think they're amplified through social platforms like that?
Oh no, absolutely. The internet absolutely amplifies all of these things. Like I said with my example of Iran, like we've seen like literally more, you know, feminist movement, even if it's not like, okay, feminist in the sense of Americanized, you know, feminism, it's still a like widespread title thing. Guess what? It's because of the internet, right? Even you can block internet access anywhere you want. It's still gonna, like, as long as you give anyone internet access, this sort of stuff is going to culminate in some sort of way.
So how do you think Bell Hooks' concept of like intersectionality between blackness, like we discovered with the clean girl aesthetic, or gender, like, you know, with the trad wife aesthetic, how do you think that type of intersectionality helps us understand these issues like in a fuller sense?
Yeah, I know. I don't really understand that question in any sort of way, but like I never really understood Bell Hooks' like idea of intersectionality anyway, so it was kind of like a weird concept that I never really like, you know, had hammered down, right? Like I always had a few issues with it, but could you repeat like what you said intersectionality was like tied into, right? Like you said like
for example, black women have a really intersectional role that emphasizes, you know, the different dimensions of their identity. So there's like blackness, but they're also women, you know, so they have like that unique experience between being a black woman. So that's kind of like what intersectionality is. Yeah,
my like view of intersectionality will always be different than like what I saw Hooks say. Like what Hooks tries to do is I think she tried to mesh it into like one thing. I never thought of it as like a mesh. I've always thought of it like you have one thing on here, you have race on the top, and then you go down a level and you go down to sex, right? Like what Bell Hooks tried to like, in my opinion, do is like sort of like mix it together. Like I'm black and I'm a woman. Like she tried to mix that and into it, like which I didn't really see.
Honestly, I have to disagree on that. I think she's right in kind of tackling these issues together. Because like she stated in the book, how in a lot of feminist spaces, they would really try to devalue her blackness and try to like push that, you know, you're a woman before you're black. And then during the pro-black, you know, movement during civil rights leaders were expecting women to kind of push aside, you know, the fact that they're women and kind of advocate for the fact that they're black first. So they would push them in like these subservient roles because they're women. So I think Bell Hooks is right in kind of, you know, intertwining them together, because blackness and womanhood, it's not something you could separate. You're a human being before you're black, before you're a woman, or anything of that nature. So I think the overlap is good. That's honestly my opinion on it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but like everything you just said, like you said like this first and then this now. Like that's what I see in it. Like you have, okay, now like in these civil rights spaces, like Bell Hooks is saying, like, right, you have black women being treated as subservient, but they weren't treated as subservient because they were black and women. They were treated subservient because they were women, right? Like it's always like the thing that I see like comes first, right? Like something comes first, then it comes afterwards, and then like the consequences of being a black woman are like indirect, but it's never like direct, right? Is what I'm like seeing from my perspective. Like, you know, like, so Bell Hooks had this point about like how with slavery, right? Like how like once the slaves were emancipated, right? Like you had black men getting the ability to vote, right? And she saw it through this lens of like black men having like a privilege to vote. But obviously from what I could see, like that's a perfect example though of like where her intersectionality view kind of, you know, fails in sort of a way where she's like, okay, black women were like left out of like the equation because for black men, and somehow that's like intersectionality, and it wasn't really coherent to me because I'm like, it left all women out. So it's kind of like what I said, like it's like this first and then second sort of thing.
I know, but if it's also first and second, then like you said, you put race above like sex and stuff like that.
Well, not race above sex, but it can go either way. Sometimes it can be race above sex, sex above race, but it's never like a mix. And when it is a mix, like when you can point out these examples, I'm saying it's more so of a consequence of like that selection process, not like I'm picking out black women in specifically, and I'm not picking out all women.
But okay, think about it. So first, black men got the right to vote. Okay, cool. Then white women. So either way, black women were still being left out, whether it's on the topic of race or whether it's on the topic of their gender. Black women were always getting the bottom of the barrel when it came to civil rights and things like that.
You said white women got the right to vote before black women?
Yeah, I think black women, they didn't get the right to vote till like maybe the 50s or 60s.
Is that true?
I think so.
I mean, I don't know necessarily if that's true or not. I thought they all, like, I thought once the 19th was repealed, that would technically apply to black women.
No, that was just white women. Here, I can fact check that if the Wi-Fi is working. But no, I don't think so.
Because that would be pretty strange, like, if it were, like, saying black women just looked like they were...
Yeah, it wasn't until 1965 with the Voting Rights Act when black women could vote. Whereas white women were able to vote in the early 20th century.
But that was not what the Voting Rights Act was, though. The Voting Rights Act was like for all black people because black people were being like harassed and like they didn't even really have the right to vote. They had like IDs. They had to like do like written tests and stuff like that. Like I know that's what like the point is. Like even with like when Bell Hooks said that like black men were privileged to have the right to vote, black men until like the Voting Rights Act, until like all these things got passed, they were like they couldn't even vote because like they literally had like to have a written test.
But that's
like,
what I'm trying to say. Like even though black men had that privilege, black women didn't. Is what I'm saying.
Well, they didn't until they repealed it, and then they got it, and then now, but then they were in the same bucket as black men now. Where like okay, we have the technical right to vote, but we can't vote. So
like I'm saying, is some black men still had the opportunity, but all black women didn't have the opportunity. Is what I'm saying. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I see what you're trying to get at, but I'm saying like when they allow black men to vote, they didn't allow women to vote. So that's what I'm saying with this like sort of like stratified view of it. You have okay, we're gonna allow black people to vote, but only the men because we hate women, right? So like there's like that, and now we're gonna allow women to vote, but you're still black, so now you're in the same bucket as the men who we didn't even really say we wanted to give the ability to vote. Like,
but on paper, I'm trying to say black men still had that privilege. And then when the Women's Rights Act, when women were allowed to vote in the 1920s, on paper, white women still had that privilege. So I'm trying to say is the legality of it, I guess. Black men and white women were still given these rights way before black women, but they still had these expectations for black women to continue to supporting them and to continue supporting their movements and things like that. So I think Bell Hooks is right, to look at it through an sectional view.
Yeah, I think she's in some ways, like, that's what I'm saying, though. She's right on the consequence of it, right? She's right on the outcomes. Okay, black women, like, since you're black and since you're a woman, obviously these consequences are going to be indirect. I just don't agree with how she's saying it's being implemented, like, within, like, okay, like, how, like, and because obviously we know, like, white men dominated throughout society, right? So every decision you have to analyze it kind of through their view. And what I'm saying is she's imposing, like, some sort of, like, intersectional lens that she sees it from onto like what white people actually thought or white men in particular actually thought at the time.
What do you mean, like thought at the time?
Like white men at the time, they saw all women as, like essentially they're slaves, right? And I'm not saying slaves in like an antebellum slavery type thing. I'm saying like they saw all women as like below them. That's why I'm saying that when they gave black men the right to vote, they didn't give their white women the ability to vote. They just gave black men the ability to vote and then harassed black men because they didn't care about black people. And then they gave them the ability to vote. Then slowly. But like once again, like do you not get what like I'm saying here, right? Like it's like first and then second sort of thing, right? It's never like okay, white men decided like okay, black women are going to be inherently different as like a direct like resource. It's kind of hard to explain, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, we can obviously have our disagreements, but that's just the way I see it.
Right. I think it's just good to be able to kind of tie it together because you're a human being. You can't separate your blackness from your womanhood or vice versa. So I think it's good to look at it through a holistic lens like that. So kind of switching over, do you think there are any male-centric cultural trends maybe that you think deserve similar or, critical examination through a feminist lens?
Yeah, I think recently one of my topics was like to go over like how we have this sort of like loneliness epidemic or whatever, and like that's a result of like a lot of different things. Of
I've
course.
heard about that. What do you think about it?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I think there's a lot of like truth of like what's happening, but I also think there's in some ways it's kind of like a lot of men like what I'm saying actually making like their own bed in some cases. But I do think that there's a lot to do with like how like the two genders are interacting, obviously. But I don't see it as like some sort of this thing that like where men have no accountability on the matter.
Honestly, I've seen that around, and I kind of disagree. I kind of agree and kind of disagree. So like the way I see it, I feel like the whole phrasing, just the phrasing of it, epidemic.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
It makes it seem like it's, this failure, like we failed men and, they're so lonely and, things like that. When, women have been going through, this quote unquote epidemic for much, much longer and have faced, much, many more consequences from it.
The epidemic of what though?
Like just loneliness. Like loneliness and, depression.
So a lot of people are lonely.
Right, exactly. So I feel like phrasing it as, this male loneliness epidemic makes it seem like, us as a society have, we failed our men and they're so lonely and blah, blah, blah. But, when it comes to women being lonely or depressed or having any sort of mental issues like that, it's an internal failure. Oh, you failed as a woman. There's something you need to fix on your own. But when a man is lonely, it's more like, oh, well, society needs to treat him nicer and, things like that. So I am kind of critical about that, yeah.
But I don't think that's what the male loneliness epidemic is saying, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't
What do you
it's
think it's
saying?
saying?
Like, I think it's just saying, like, the way, like, people are interacting is, like, a lot harder, right? Like, a lot of, like, one, like, major, like, point that's brought up is, like, how, like, sometimes, like, they say, like, females have, like, raised their standards and stuff like that.
Women,
you know what I'm
yeah.
saying? There's stigmas around how they should act and how they should behave, around, like, how masculinity should be portrayed. So, like, when you have these contradicting, like, forces, men are, like, we're confused, and then they immediately, like, and some of them, like, bend the knee to him, and then they bow down, and then they, end up in this cycle where, like, now I'm lonely, right? Now I don't want to, like, I don't want to go outside, you know what I'm saying? Now I don't want to talk to people. And, it sort of leads to that. Because, like, if I go outside, I talk to people, I'm toxic. But if I stay inside, I'm, like, I'm lonely, and, you know what I'm saying? It's, what's my fault? And, you know what I'm saying? It's not to say, like, oh, it's just this big societal issue. Like, men should be able to figure it out. But
Right, yeah.
But, yeah, like, it's still these contradicting forces and these contradicting expectations that I do think contribute a lot to it, and a lot of people don't know how to like handle that. Like it takes a lot of intellect to be able to do that, and honestly, not a lot of men are not that intellectual to do that.
Honestly, but like you said, like I feel like a lot of people are trying to pin it on the women of having too many or having standards that are too high. When honestly,
that was important.
The way I see it is the only way to really combat it is to create. For men to create these circles within their own spaces that are positive and reinforce, positive energy and things like that. So, you can't really blame any sort of, stunted, emotional development or lack of meaningful relationships on women when, before all else, I think you should have meaningful relationships with your male peers and, other men in your life. So I think that's my take on it.
Yeah, well, I think you can slice all of that into like entirely different issues, right? Like what you said with the male things. I had this really good idea, right, that I found. Like it was like men do not have a lot of spaces. Like they don't have a lot of rights. They don't have a lot of like areas that they can just go to and just be like, okay, these are male-centered spaces. Like for example, like how men like used to have like these like all these spaces, like camps, Boy Scouts, like jiu-jitsu gyms, like those are still existing now. Yeah. But like when I'm talking about like specific male areas, like those places have even been demonized too.
What do you mean, like specific male areas?
Well, like I just gave you with the examples, right? Like how like retreats, men's retreats, like men's places, like there's not a lot of those areas. And when you like see men doing that, and when they try to promote that, like oddly enough, it gets seen as like homoerotic. It's just like, oh, you're gay for going out, like for like going with men. So it's like, how do you balance? Like once again, a lot of contradicting ideas, and not a lot of men are able to do this. And there's not a lot of like people who are like, okay, how do we fix this? Because like, well, if I do something now, I'm seen as gay. And if I don't do something, now I'm seen as lonely, and it's my fault, or
I mean, I think, like I said earlier, it's only something you have to fix within these male spaces, because no one, honestly, the way I see it, no one's calling these male-centered spaces gay other than men. I don't see any women calling. Well,
it's called gay, but then it's also then like sometimes by women it's like, oh, this is a toxic area. This is toxic. This is toxic masculinity, whatever. Like, I'm not saying that it's always the hobby horse, but it's this thing that like always recurring. So like you'll have men calling it gay, you'll have women calling it toxic, and it's like, what do you do when like all these spaces are demonized?
I mean, I think the way, as a woman, women are mainly calling it toxic because they don't really want to enter these male dominated spaces. So yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that it's meant to help men. It's mainly just because it's so male dominated, and then there's this pressure of being or not being necessarily in these spaces, but just the idea of having these male dominated spaces when historically spaces that kind of, I guess, not devalue, but don't have as much of a female presence aren't necessarily the best to put yourself in.
But females have their own spaces where
for sure.
There's literally zero male presence. So I'm just saying, like, there has to be a space where men can, like, have their area. And, of course, sometimes they can be very toxic, obviously, a good amount of time. Like, a good example, like, the Andrew Tate space, whatever. Those spaces can be toxic, but, like, when we begin to like when we get a hammer, everything becomes a nail, and everything becomes a bad thing when it comes to men, and that's just what I'm saying, right? Like now we just don't have any like one willing to step up and like bring this together, and now like once again it contributes to the epidemic or whatever.
But yeah, I think definitely phrasing it as an epidemic is
it's a little, I think it's a little hyperbolic.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, do you think there's any sort of generational difference between these trends? Because honestly, specifically with the I'm just a girl trend, I've seen even some older women using it. The fact that, I'm like, I'll see it online. I'm like, lady, you're pushing 40, pushing 50. Not that those are necessarily old. It's just middle age. But I'm like, you're most definitely not a girl. And I feel like you know better than to be using your girlhood as an excuse like that. But what do you think about the generational differences?
You're talking about in the female topics we explored?
Or just anything. Just any of the trends we've seen, whether it's male loneliness or, the female topics and things like that.
Yeah, well, with the male topic, I would say specifically, right, like, what I'm saying with this trend, though, is like men used to be out and about. They used to, once again, have more spaces back in the day. And now that's sort of like catered off. We don't have a lot of, men going outside, right? Not a lot of people going and touching grass, right?
Right.
There used to be like all these areas, once again. Like, I don't really have a pin to put on like specific, places. But like I said, like, a good one would be like the Boy Scouts, right? Like I was reading this thing, like how Boy Scouts are like dying out. You don't have like, you don't really have these camps anymore because like people don't want to run them. Like, what I'm saying? They're losing memberships, right? Like, and those things, like when I was a kid, those used to be like, this used to be popular. Those
like even I used to be in Girl Scouts, but like.
So now it's just sort of like this devaluation of like, areas for men.
So how do you think we could encourage a more nuanced and critical, viewpoint around these topics in our daily lives?
Well, my personal scheme and my framework has always been you have to destroy both systems, right? You have to destroy the system of like this toxic masculinity. You have to destroy the system of like where men are like, oh, we don't need to be empathetic. We don't need to like have this empathy. We don't need to understand. And then you also need to destroy the system of like women with this like overly virulent reaction of like, hey, these areas are toxic, don't have these things, and it all leads to these contradicting views, and now there's no space in the middle for anyone to like have any reason.
Yeah, they're heavy on that no space in the middle part. I think kind of tying back to the intersectionality thing, I think it's good to kind of really blend everything together to get an overhead viewpoint on it all.
Like I said, it's not a fixed pie. Everyone thinks it's a fixed pie. Everyone thinks it's a zero-sum game, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can also always be this place where you have to listen. Like you said, like it shouldn't be this whole we only blame women thing, or it shouldn't be this whole we only blame men thing. We have to figure out what the problem is from each side, because like I said, like I even said with this, like with the bell hooks thing, like you have to look at it from right here, right there, right there, right there. You can't look at it from like it's all these people's fault. It's all these people's fault. Because we want simple answers, but it's never simple, ever.
I don't think it's really her blaming people. I think it's just her kind of being able to pinpoint and compartmentalize who to place blame on. There's different, factors to play into it. Like she said in the book, how, white men were making, sexual advances, and then white women were demonizing black women, and then, you know, you have black men who are kind of othering black women, kind of alienating them throughout the whole, you know, civil rights movement and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just think you can't put like a general lens on it though, because she did say like, hey, I don't want to dismiss this thing, but then like I did see her like say like, okay, black men were like spared from sexual violence, whatever, and like obviously that I thought was like an insane claim that I did hear from Bell Hooks, because I'm like, okay, but like, do you really, like, even, you have to just be even skeptical once you hear that, right? Like, black men spared from sexual violence, like, do you really think that there were no black men that were, you know,
for
sexually
sure.
abused? Like, they were definitely, like, obviously not to the extent of black women, but, like, to dismiss that altogether, I think it's just entailing of, like, this, like, too overly specific lens from what I saw, like, you know what I'm saying?
But she made a reference to the slave narrative, Incidents of Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. I read that, and so, because Harriet Jacobs, she was enslaved, and so she made a lot of notes she made a note, I guess, and it was mentioned in Ain't I a Woman as well, how black men would willingly offer, you know, black women and, you know, their wives to their enslavers, you know, as some sort of penance or something, rather than, you know, I guess fighting on her behalf or rejecting that whole thing.
You mean in like African societies? Or like,
no, during times of enslavement, black men would offer their wives to their enslavers, you know, to please them, and I thought that was really interesting. I really did.
But they were also slaves, though. Like, don't you think that there's like a level of like, you know, self survival, like
self preservation?
Like, obviously, like, you know.
Yeah, I get that, but it's really, you have to think about it. Self preservation at what cost? You know?
Yeah.
So,
I'm not denying that though. That does sound.
Yeah, but she, you know, in the Incidents of Life of a Slave Girl, Harriet Jacobs, also kind of hinted at how, you know, like you said, how black men were being sexually abused during the whole slave system. So it really goes both ways, but I do genuinely think that black men got the brunt force of it all, black women got the brunt force of it all.
Yeah, I just don't like the whole like flattening it out thing and like being like, oh, okay, I'm overly specific and now we have to like ignore it. Because I think the one thing we have to think is important is we're all part of the human race, right? Like, all of us are humans, right? So all of us feel pain. Me and you, we all have the ability and capacity to feel pain, right? So like, even though there was I'm not even like downplay like that, but there was sexual violence, right? But like, to like hyper specific and then hone in to the point where you can't even see that there's it on either side, I thought from Bell Hooks' perspective was a, you know, very disastrous thing.
Right. But, you know, on that topic of us all, I guess, being human, you have to realize that a lot of us, specifically just black people as a whole, weren't viewed as human.
Yeah, no, obviously, like, and that's the one thing that I think Bell Hooks could learn from as well, right? Like, when you think about it, like, 19th century, well, it started in, like, the 18th century. They saw all black people as subhuman. They saw all black people as this lesser race, right? So, like, none of us, like, both of us in this room, we would have been seen as, like, you know, ants or whatever to be stepped on.
Yeah,
it's just crazy to think about.
So yeah, this, honestly, kind of to wrap up, this was a really thought-provoking discussion, and I'm just really delighted to kind of talk about these things and just have despite our differences, despite the things we agreed on, just have a really good, you know, look at how Bell Hooks, how her work from, you know, decades ago really continues to illuminate on, you know, so many aspects of our current cultural landscape.
All right, so that wraps it up, right?
Yeah, but I just kind of wanted to summarize kind of the key takeaway points from this conversation and how it relates to Ain't I a Woman and, you know, these modern trends and stuff like that. So I really do think that, you know, it's a reminder, you know, for us to always look beneath the surface of these seemingly, you know, positive or aspirational trends. Kind of like I stated, how the I'm just a girl thing was funny at first, but then I really thought about it. Or, you know, the girl boss culture, it seems nice at first, but then it's like, it's a bit too capitalistic and too, you know, profit centered. And, you know, it's important to ask who's included and who's excluded in these, you know, trends and aesthetics that we, you know, hold ourselves accountable for.
Yeah, I think that for my last thing, if we're about to, like, you know, wrap it up here, that's one thing I see as important always, like, relating to this entire thing. I think the moral of the story, from my perspective, should be anytime you see a certain trend that's online, you should think about it intellectually in every sort of way, right? Like, a lot of people they skip over it, they don't understand it. Like, one thing that I think about recently is, like, you know, the cooking with Kaya thing or whatever. Like, a lot of that was, like, you know, it was foolish. A lot of people didn't take it seriously. But from my perspective, I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what are the dynamics at play here? And I think like if you want to like really like raise your intellectual ability, you should really be looking at these things like not just as these like benign things, but like as something that's like seriously deep and telling of like how people think. You should analyze it, right? You should go like, why are people mad at this? Why are people mad at Cooking with Kai or whatever? Like, you know what I'm saying? You should really take a moment to just think and introspect on it. Is from what is my perspective on this.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Excuse me. I never really, to be honest, personally, I never really looked at the whole Cooking with Kaya thing, but I've seen a lot of the other people trying to remake her whole brand. I've never really thought too much on it.
Yeah, it's something interesting. I think you should, check up on and see.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think it definitely ties into like the traditional topic.
Because I have seen people who kind of like replicate her whole brand, and it's a lot of specifically, well, both people, men and women, kind of like will sexualize themselves in the whole cooking aspect. Yeah. But yeah, still don't know too much on it. I have to look into it. So yeah, thank you to everyone listening and for joining in on, Next Gen Podcast. We, really hope this conversation helps spark some sort of, thought about all these things and, has given you a new way of thinking about the world. Thank you. I'm Nayla Peters.
I'm Tim Gernison.
And thank you. You have a good day.
Like I'm home before the street lights do. Ice cream on my front porch and my new Fubu and my A1s too. Watching my happy block, my whole neighborhood hit the dip.